slide on this. Still, of course, on teeter. So you have the last comment. Amortization schedule intended to reduce debt to original $5.5 million over 7 years. So you're saying that when this was discussed with the prior auditor and this whole concept came forward, there was no plan to fully amortize it?
Our understanding of the teeter plan is much more in depth at this point than it was at that moment in 2005. And yes, that's the way that amortization schedule was set up. At this point, our view is that it needs to deal with the entire debt, and that's why we need to look at revising the amortization schedule.
I mean, if we never look at the $5.5 million that's still sitting there that we're paying interest on, right?
Correct.
How are we really resolving the long-term issue?
I absolutely agree.
Okay. So then if you could go forward to the next one, which is, I'm hoping, I was jumping forward hoping that that's maybe what you meant, or at least a portion of it. Your last comment on this one is number, well, it isn't a number, it's the last bullet point there. Need to update amortization schedule after the 08-09 fiscal year. So I'm hoping that what we're going to be looking at is an amortization to, realize the entire debt.
That's what was intended by that bullet point.
Oh, good, okay.
What's going to happen in 2008-09, as it stands now, is we will see what happens when we apply the revenue against that. So the updated amortization schedule not only needs to deal with applying the revenues towards it, but also looking at zeroing out that particular debt. And we can also look at other ways of financing it if, at some point that becomes more financially feasible than it is now.
Good, thank you. I just was concerned, and I'm glad that we wrapped in the last portion of the previous slide with this one, and I think that makes a lot more fiscal sense, and it means that we're really looking at the overall debt and the seriousness of that and the impacts to the annual budget, and we've got to just go forward, and it's going to be a painful process, but we have to just do it.
And I think that's why Tom's concept of the debt advisory committee is, I assume that's where those discussions will take place.
Supervisor. Keep in mind, in that era, 92, that was when the board refinanced the courthouse to the Japanese, and it was, I don't know what the problems were in Mendocino County, but they had some severe financial problems or inability to make decisions. The first thing needs to happen, it doesn't need to be called a teeter plan. Call it the teeter debt. Call it what it is. I mean, and that's why, I'm kind of embarrassed because then this went through my tenure from 95 to 98. I'm mad at myself for not making sure that it was dealt with and put it on an amortization table, whether it was a 5-year, 10-year, even a 20-year amortization schedule. But to put it on an amortization schedule that only gets it back to its basic principle, I mean, that's.
We totally agree.
I mean, they don't teach you that in any kind of accounting. Anyways, it has to be, and that's why I say maybe to look at all the other options, like maybe combining it with it to refinance the COP and add it in. Because I look at the teeter plan just the same amount of debt as our certificates of participation, the same way, and they are the same way. So we need to recognize it as a debt. I don't know. Maybe there's advantage to the auditor by calling it a teeter plan and not a teeter debt. I don't know. Maybe the auditor looks at it different, but it's actually just a plain and simple debt that needs to be paid back. The only difference is that it's the county treasury that's financing it, and not, we don't owe it to a bank or a corporation or something. But it needs to be dealt with, and I think we need to look at all these. If the interest rates, although our existing COPs probably have a pretty reasonable interest rate right now.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing? Just for clarification, Supervisor Pinches, we cannot refinance all of our debt that we currently have. Some of it is non-refinanceable. It's only partials on the COPs. So we did look at that, and we can look at it again, but it wasn't fiscally or financially viable at the time with the interest rates.
But one of the options is you could do a sole and separate COP just for the teeter plan amount. You could do that.
Our current interest rate is so good in paying back our treasury right now that there's no way we could beat it.
But we will always keep an eye on it. So speaking of county financial health, the reason it's critical to reduce the teeter plan debt, ultimately eliminate it, is in order to reduce the loss of funds to interest payments on that debt, to maintain an acceptable credit rating, and to achieve better audit results. The county actually has a policy number 32 that refers to the importance of maintaining the county's credit rating. And I want to be clear, that's not just about borrowing money for particular projects. The county on a regular basis, as was referred to before, borrows money for cash flow called TRANS, tax revenue anticipation notes, and the interest we pay on that is reflected in our credit rating. So, just to recap, the debts and liabilities for 2007-08, this was included in the last year's PowerPoint, and it amounted to around $10.1 million. And for 2008-09, we've got many of those same particular issues. We've added the microwave system to that, and the teeter plan amount, it was intended to be a graduated amount, so that's why it goes up. So for 2008-09, the projected debts and liabilities is around $10.4 million. Okay. Another component in looking at the budget has to do with budget reserves. And for the general reserve, the goal is 5% of general fund appropriations, which is around $3 million. Currently, we have $1.9 million in our general reserve. So we're about at 2/3 strength there. For the contingency fund, our goal is about 3% of general fund appropriations, which is $1.8 million. Currently, we have $600,000. As we said before, $500,000 of that was taken from the teeter payment, the planned teeter payment. So we actually went into the budget with $100,000 in the contingency fund. And it's just something that we have to keep in mind, that we hope we will continue to build up the general reserves and ultimately have a decent contingency fund.
What was our general reserve, say, like 5 years ago?
I couldn't tell you 5 years ago what, about $1 million? Oh. Yeah, when it was about $2.9 million, and when we had to make the last $900,000 payment to the state, there was absolutely no other place to take it from except for here, and we haven't been able to build it back up again.
But you said it was down to $1 million 5 years ago? Oh, okay.
Okay, so looking at county budget priorities, these were the ones for this current fiscal year or last year's budget process, and they were continued from the prior year, 2006-07. It was the debts and liability schedules, the completion of the jail booking remodel project, the justice facilities plan, the UVAP and general plan updates and other activities of the planning team, the Mill Creek dams, and finance system implementation. Those were the budget priorities that continued into this year from the previous year. In addition, during the budget process, there were some other priorities added. One was the compensation commitments to staff, because at the point at which we entered into 2007-2008, we had basically completed the negotiations with all of the bargaining units. The board wanted to provide funding assistance for EMS and fire. The board also put a high priority on strategic coordination of water or water supply projects, wanted a greater investment in roads, and then mid-year the microwave system was added. So these were added